dogs make the best companions for humans, this podcast aims to help make humans better companions for their dogs. Welcome to the Baru Podcast, a modern lifestyle podcast for dogs and their people. I'm your host, Charlotte Bain. I've been caring for other people's dogs for more than 15 years. And while I've learned a lot in my career, I definitely don't know it all. So I've collected an ever-evolving roster of amazing dog people, and I learn new things from them all the time. Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Baru Podcast. In continuing my conversations around end of life and pet loss, in this episode, I chat with Christiana Saia of Lap of Love. Christiana is a certified grief coach who helps hold space for pet parents who are grieving the loss of their beloved pets. We discuss why pet grief has been historically considered a disenfranchised grief and often dismissed or not even discussed. We chat about the anger and the guilt often associated with pet loss and how to identify if what you're feeling is anticipatory grief. We also discuss the importance of self-compassion during the grieving process. So let's listen. Well, thank you so much for jumping on this chat with me. As I mentioned, I'm doing a few episodes on pet loss and pet grief because it's something that I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with. I experienced the loss of my pet growing up, but I haven't experienced the loss of a pet as an adult. And my own guy is almost 15. Well, he's 15 now. He's doing great, but I find myself getting a little anxious, obviously. He's slowing down and I see the signs of aging. And I do understand that he's doing great for 15, but each day brings a little bit of anxiety. And I also care for so many other dogs, and they're all like over 10 suddenly and all doing well. Gosh. But I know like almost all of my clients are over 10 years old. So I thought it would be really great to kind of explore the topic of grief around the loss of our pets. And I know it's not a subject that a lot of people, I think they're starting to talk about it more as we just talk about pet guardianship and pet parenthood and all the things more than we used to. But it's not something that gets a lot of credit, I guess, is for lack of a better term. So first of all, you are a professional grief coach with Lap of Love, a fantastic company that I just had Dr. Nick on, as I mentioned, who we love. And he talked to me about the really hard subject of pet euthanasia and hospice care. So I'd love to know just kind of a little bit about what it is what makes you different from a grief counselor or a grief therapist, and also a little bit about your history. What got you into this work and what inspired you, or what was the calling for you to do this wonderful work that you do with Lap of Love?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm so glad that you're creating this space to have this discussion, because I think that in general, society doesn't really hold space for grief, but especially pet loss. So I'm just really grateful that you are doing this. As far as a little bit about me, I experienced my own grief quite a while ago, and it was really impactful in my life. Fortunately, I was going to a university, getting my undergrad, and I had the resources and the support. And that has always really stuck with me. And as I have kind of gone through life and experienced grief a little bit more, I've recognized that this is just something that we need to create space for, and that we can't fix. There's no fixing grief. There's just holding space and allowing people to feel what they need to feel and being there with them in it. And so that led me to Lap of Love after getting my certification in grief counseling. And as an end of life doula, I discovered Lap of Love and worked with them, just making those appointments for euthanasias and taking those calls for about a year. And then they created the pet loss support team because we realized that there's just this need that people need that
Yeah.
support. And so we here as grief coaches are really here to walk them through that process.
Right. Can I ask you,
Yeah.
you just mentioned you're an end of life doula. I assume that's for
Yeah.
humans. Can you briefly tell us what that entails? Because I've only heard that term only a few times, but I'm assuming it's like a birth doula, but end of life. But a little bit about what that is, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much like a birth doula, but on the opposite end of life. It's really sitting vigil and being the emotional support for a family as they go through this anticipatory grief and end of life care, and helping them do things, such as legacy work and bringing those things up, and helping
Oh,
them, just have some respite, and supporting the family as much as it is supporting the person who is dying, and really just
right.
sitting vigil, and not being one of those people who are, afraid to say the wrong thing, or, don't want
Right.
to, deal with that topic, and just being like
Right.
there with them. Yeah.
Right. That's so fantastic. What amazing work that you do. So when you are holding space, I guess, for people who are dealing with the loss of a beloved pet, what are some of the biggest reasons that people seek your help? Some of the common things that
Yeah.
people need you for, or need to share with you.
Yeah, so I'll answer that, and then I'll kind of include my answer of the difference between a grief coach and a licensed mental health counselor as well. So,
Perfect. That's great.
as grief coaches, we really are here to walk through this journey, hold the hand of people who have lost a pet, and
Hmm.
kind of just validate what they're going through, help them have a deeper understanding of the grief experience, and maybe help them and suggest some coping techniques or coping mechanisms to help get through the grief and honor their loved one, because pet loss is what is called a disenfranchised grief. And
Right.
that is a grief that goes unacknowledged, unvalidated by society, which
Right.
anybody who's lost a pet can probably say that they've had this experience of somebody saying, it was just a pet, just get another
Right.
one. Are you over it
Right.
by now? Right.
Right.
But our pets are our closest family members, right? They
Yeah.
see our most authentic selves. They're forgiving. They love us every day, but they like us every day, which even our most beloved humans, we don't always
Yeah.
get that,
It's sure.
Yeah. So it's just a gift, and it's a profound love. So there's going to be that profound grief. And so
Right.
we as grief coaches are educated in grief and pet loss, and just here to hold their hands through it. Now, as far as the difference between a grief coach and grief counselor, as grief coaches, like I said, we're here to walk them through the journey, hold their hands through it. But if there are things that are blocking that journey,
Hmm.
they might need somebody who has the licensure and training to help them, such as if somebody is trying to cope with symptoms of mental illness. That's not to
Right.
say we can't and won't help people who have mental illness, of course,
Right.
but if they're in an acute episode, then they would be better supported by somebody who has that training and can help them walk through that. Same
Right.
thing with trauma. If there is trauma that is coming up that is blocking somebody from being present with their grief, then
Yeah.
as we are trauma informed, but it's they would be better supported. They would be in a better position to be with somebody who specializes in that and can
Yeah.
help them differentiate the trauma and the grief and where they intertwine, so that they can come back to the grief and
Right.
be present with it. And especially if somebody is in crisis or having thoughts of self-harm,
Mm-hmm.
That is out of our scope, and we want to acknowledge our limitations in being able to help. So in that case, we would
Right.
refer them probably to a crisis hotline, or something
Yeah.
like that. So, just those little differences of where there are some things where we want to recognize that, there are some things that people deserve to have the help that they need to get through it, and we can't
Yeah.
always provide every aspect of it.
Right. Right. It takes a team. It takes a team. Yeah. With
Yes,
everything. So
exactly. You can never have enough support.
you can never have enough support. That's very
Yeah.
true. So can we talk about some of the phases of grief that one might go through or one might expect to go through if there's such a thing?
Yes. I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I think that this is a misconception in grief. And I
Mm,
think that it comes from, we've all heard, or many of us have heard of the 5 stages of grief, the denial, bargaining, depression, anger, and
mm-hmm.
acceptance, right? We've all heard of that. And I don't like the expression phases of grief,
Okay.
because one, it insinuates that grief is linear, right?
Mm, mm-hmm.
And grief
Mm-hmm.
is anything but linear. It's messy. It's all over the
Yeah.
place. And
Yeah.
sometimes we may feel anger, and then we may feel some bargaining, and then we may feel anger again, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We revisit a lot of our emotions that sometimes we thought we were done with, but our journey
Mm-hmm.
takes us to revisit these emotions with a lived experience. And sometimes we're feeling some of these different things at once: denial, anger, guilt, all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just a phase, so it's an entire experience, and there is no there's no roadmap, unfortunately, because everybody has a
Mm-hmm.
different journey, everybody has a different map.
Right.
And so it's just allowing yourself to feel what you need to feel, and knowing that you may not feel that anger, you may not feel that guilt, you may not,
Right.
so there is no guarantee that you will or will not go through the preconceived phases of grief.
Why do you think that it may be individual, but is there a common reason people feel angry or a common reason people feel like guilty around the loss of a pet?
Yeah, yeah. So, of course, everybody's different. I can't speak universally, but
Sure.
some of the most common things that I've found is, with anger especially, is there's this sense of injustice, right? There's this
Mm-hmm,
sense
mm-hmm.
of somebody that I love has been taken from me.
Sure.
And
Especially if it's too
oftentimes,
soon. Yeah.
especially if it's too soon, yes. And especially when I have done everything that I can to try to keep them here with me, and try to make sure that they had a great life and that they were healthy. And this sense of injustice, and something that has been taken from me. It goes back to our inner child. When we were children and something that we loved was just taken from us without explanation, what happened? We
Right.
protested, right?
We
We
did. We
had a
sure did.
tantrum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really goes back to that, just, inner child in us, and that feeling of something that we love has been taken from us, and it's not
Right.
fair. It doesn't feel fair. And
Yeah.
so that anger is valid. And it's important to remember that anger is often a secondary emotion. So if we dig a little bit
Mm-hmm.
deeper, usually there's something underneath it. It could be fear of loneliness. It could be loneliness
Mm,
itself. It could
mm-hmm.
be, the sadness. And
Mm-hmm.
so anger it's important to validate it, and important to dig a little bit deeper with it as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, yeah. And then, as far as guilt goes, I think that probably the biggest reason why we feel guilt in pet loss, and I will say guilt is really the rule and not the exception when it comes to pet loss.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Grief in
Okay.
general, but especially pet loss. I have so many people that ask me, is this normal? And I'm just like, yes, it is what
Okay.
you're feeling. And not that it makes it any easier, but it can be helpful to know that what you're experiencing is normal.
I was
It's
gonna
part of the
say, yeah.
process. And it means that you will be able to get through it and work through that,
Right.
right? Guilt is a way for us to have some control, to feel like we have some control over the situation, or that we
That
had
makes
control.
sense. Yeah.
Because nothing makes us feel more out of control than death, right?
Right.
When
Right.
somebody has died,
Nothing we can
we
do about
can't,
it. Yep.
nothing we can do. We can't change their diet. We can't get the right, we can't do any of that. It's done. We can't
Mm-mm.
change it. And as human beings, our psyche doesn't like that. Our psyche
Yeah.
wants to feel like we have control over our lives, that there is an order to things, that if we do this, then this will happen, and so that is really difficult for us to grapple with. So the guilt oftentimes is finding ways that we could have had control, where if I would have just done this, then this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
It's ways of taking control, getting that sense of control over the situation a little bit. That's one of the main reasons. But added on to that is our extreme sense of responsibility that we have for our pets.
Right. Right.
Right? We're responsible for every aspect of their lives. And we do the best that we can with the information that we have at the time and our abilities to do
Sure.
so. But ultimately, there's 100% death rate amongst living beings. That's it,
Yep.
right? It's pretty much guaranteed. And so I think
As
it's
far
so
as we know.
important, as far as we know, right? Yeah, let me know if we find the secret.
Okay.
Fountain of youth. I'm ready for it.
Okay.
But as I just think it's so important to remember, especially when we're feeling that guilt, is that death is not a failure,
Right.
right? You did not fail your pet.
Right.
Death is part of this natural life cycle. And sometimes our loved ones are taken from us sooner than we want to,
Mm-hmm.
but death is not a failure. And it's important to remember that your pet dying does not mean you failed them in any way, shape, or
Mm-hmm.
form.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the guilt, and I don't know, but I can imagine is that we have to make some tough choices when it comes to the end of life. Per my conversation with Dr. Nick, making tough choices on what kind of care they should have, or when they should be, when you might have to choose euthanasia. Because I think very few people, dogs pass away peacefully on their own. They're really
Mm-hmm.
lucky if they have a dog that lives to, old age, and then he just, when it's his time, it's his time. A lot of times people have to make those really hard end of life choices. And I can imagine it's just like a complex emotions that go with that. Do you want to touch on that a bit?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought this up, and that you got the chance to talk about it with Dr. Nick. Euthanasia is just the grand slam of guilt,
Yeah.
really. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter when we did it, if we did it, too soon or too late, like we're always going to feel that way. And
Yeah.
it's this thing of, with humans, usually we don't make that decision for them, right? And if we do,
Right.
oftentimes we've had the opportunity to talk to them about what they would want, right?
Yeah.
Because humans have a sense of mortality. Our animals don't. They don't have
Yeah.
that sense of mortality to have those, kind of conversations. Also, they don't speak English, so that doesn't help
Right.
either. Um, and so that decision, it's a hard decision to make. And what I will say is that it's gonna feel too soon, oftentimes, until it feels too late. And there's guilt associated with
Mm.
both sides of that.
Mm.
And just to recognize that is part of the grieving process, is questioning. The questioning is
Right.
a big part of it. Um, but the way that I see it, me personally, my belief is that we are responsible, like we were saying, for every single aspect of our pets' lives, every
Right.
single thing. And it makes sense to me that it is part of our responsibility, if we're able to
Mm-hmm.
offer them a peaceful transition, to
Yes.
offer
Yeah.
them a transition surrounded by love,
Mm-hmm.
in hearing our voices last. Now, we can't always do that, because life is what happens when
Right.
we're busy making plans,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing is that not many pets pass naturally, and that's okay. That's a very personal choice. but not all pets pass peacefully, naturally. That's the hope.
Right.
That's
Yes.
the hope, but
Yes.
it
That's a
doesn't
very
always
important
happen
point.
that
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that it's just so important if your pet is geriatric or terminally ill
Mm-hmm.
to just try to have a plan, and have an
Mm-hmm.
idea of what you want to do and how you want to say goodbye, so that
Mm-hmm.
as time passes on, you can have those conversations with yourself that are really
Mm-hmm.
difficult to have.
Mm-hmm.
So in anticipatory grief, it can actually relieve some of that anxiety, although it seems counterproductive, right? Because we just don't want to think about it.
Right.
But it can
Right.
actually relieve some of that anxiety to have a plan of, this is when I'm going to say goodbye when this happens. I'm going to call lap of love and do it at home, or I'm going to do it at my vet, or
Mm-hmm.
however.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you about anticipatory grief because I've been reading a little bit about it. And I've read that it can just start even when you see the signs of your dog aging,
Mm-hmm.
because you're starting to realize, that time is moving on. And what are some of the things to look for, I guess, in anticipatory grief, or what are some of the things that we might be able to identify those as some of the feelings that we're having?
Yeah. Yeah. It really can happen. It can happen the moment that you realize that you have this beautiful little creature and that they're going to die. One of my colleagues told me the
Yeah.
other day that the moment they adopted their pet, they started feeling that, it really can
Yeah.
happen,
Like knowing that it's not going to last
anytime.
forever. Right.
Right. Right.
The physical aspect, the love will last forever.
The
But
love will be there forever.
yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why I always say the grief is going to be there too forever.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
evolves and it becomes part of our story, but the love that we grieve in direct correlation to how much we love. And the love is there forever. But
Yeah.
I digress. As far as anticipatory grief goes, one really common aspect of it, like I mentioned, is that anxiety of just
Yeah.
of living in the future and having a hard time just being present with your pet and enjoying today.
Mm.
So that's really common. The fear, there's a lot of fear of what is life going to look like without them here.
Sure.
Because they're like an anchor in our lives. And there's so much
100%.
that, yes, and all of the changes, right, that we go through, and all of the relationships, the new jobs, the moves, the loved
Yep.
ones passing away, our illnesses, and the one thing that we could rely on, it was a constant support, and it's like an anchor. And the
Yeah.
idea of what is life going to look like without this anchor is scary, right?
Yeah.
It's scary to think about.
Very scary.
So those are some really common things. Sadness, of course, just being sad and recognizing it. Um, and anticipatory grief is so normal. I think it just helps just to have a name for it, just to know that what you're feeling, it's a thing, right?
It's a thing.
It's
Yeah.
a, yeah, yeah,
You're not
it's a
alone.
thing.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of, I think, what I would assume people, what some of the most beneficial things that you can give people is just the knowledge that what they are dealing with and what they're going through is normal. And they are not alone in their individual experiences. Is individual to them, but they're not alone in like the collective way of grief and how people, navigate through life during those times. So that's great. So in alignment with talking about how you just mentioned how they're an everyday part of our life, and they go through with relationships and our daily life and all of those things. Like, what about, like, are there things that we could do, like, let's say after your pet passes, your daily routine changes, right? Like, I mean, I know my whole
Mm-hmm.
day is kind of navigates around like his walks and his feeding schedule and all the things I know,
Yes.
that he needs and stuff. Should we, are there things that can ease that kind of like shocking transition or that loneliness that might come up during those times, when you wake up and you realize like, I don't have I mean, some people might be elated that they don't have to go walk their dog, but just some of those moments that probably it may hurt the most when you have those moments that come and go, right? So
Yeah.
does that make sense?
And, I want to comment on, some people may be elated. They may not have to walk their dog, because caretaker burnout is real.
Yes.
And I'm speaking from I'm going to state a hospice statistic or fact for humans, but I think it counts for pets as well as caretakers. Is the most common feeling that we have after being long-term caretakers for a sick loved one is relief, and that's okay. It's important that people know, like, that's okay. Like it's okay that, like, you're enjoying a moment to breathe, and that you don't have to wake up every 4 hours for medication. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't do it all over again or do it again if they were here, but it's okay to live in the reality that you get a break, that you get some relief from that caretaking. It doesn't take away from how much you loved them. So I really wanted to just
that's really important, because I know that my,
absolutely.
If I can share a quick story, and I don't know if she'll let me share it on the podcast, but my sister just had to euthanize her dog. He was 15 and a half. He was a wonderful family companion. He was the best boy, and he lived a long, great life. But those last, I would say even a little bit more than 6 months were just really, really, really hard, because everything revolved around, again, like getting up like several times in the middle of the night, making sure he was okay. And you had, this issue and that issue, and not getting sleep and worry. And I think part of also knowing that he was peacefully, he left peacefully, but I think there is a sense of relief that, because I could see it was the weight of that was just really heavy on her, and worrying about making the right choices and all of the things. And once the moment finally passed and leading up to it, she was able to take, a breath and do some things for her that, make her feel better. And it doesn't make the grief go away. She's still very, very, it's very sad, but she's able to go for a walk. She couldn't go for a normal walk. He required a lot of care.
Yeah, it doesn't make the grief go away, and nor should it. I think that it's an honor to be in grief, as crazy as that sounds, but to have loved that much, and it's a universal human experience, and so it doesn't take away from the grief. But I always say, when you've been a caretaker and your loved one has passed, the baton gets handed over, and it's your turn to put the same time, affection, energy, and love into caretaking for yourself that you did your loved one. Right. It's so important to do that.
It's really important.
But as far as preparing, when you're in that anticipatory grief for that time when they're not going to be here, first and foremost, I want to say, I don't think we're ever really prepared.
Right.
It can be helpful to know, to be able to say your goodbyes. It can be so helpful to be able to do that rather than a sudden death, which does impact the grief journey and the grief reaction. But just know that it's going to be hard, but we can do hard things. Right. But the things that I really recommend doing in anticipatory grief is one, just being present every day with them and spending a little bit of time. And it's hard to do all the time because we have to think about the future sometimes, but 10 minutes a day, just, set your alarm or set your timer, snuggle with them, feel their fur, smell their stinky breath, just, 10 minutes a day of that quality time and just being there in the moment, asking yourself, is my head where my feet are at right now? That's kind of how you can bring yourself back. And one thing I also,
hi
there's
there.
My dog. I guess somebody came home. Yeah, I think somebody's coming home.
It's appropriate. What kind of dog do you have?
I have two older guys. They're mutts. They're 11 and 12.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So they're getting up there. So I mean, every day is a gift, and I never know when it's gonna be. So I'm just happy to spend every day with them. Let me just put him in the other room real quick. Hey, Pupper. What's up? You guys okay?
They're like, what? We were just barking.
I thought somebody was coming home. All right, we good? Okay. All right, I think they're good. They're just barking at the neighbors.
As one does when you're a dog.
As one does. Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So, okay, I was talking about being present. And then one thing that I think is really helpful is writing. What writing does is it makes us slow down. And we have to organize our thoughts because all of those thoughts and feelings are jumbled up. They're not linear in our heads.
Yeah.
But when we write, we have to make them linear. We have to organize them and articulate it. And putting words to our experience is one of those other ways to have a little bit of a sense of control over what we're going through and experiencing. So journaling can be helpful. And if you're not into journaling, then I would just say try this exercise, which is writing a series of 3 letters, right? And the first letter is a letter to your pet. And this can be done before they pass or after they pass, really either one. Right. Writing a letter to your pet. And if it's before they pass, write about your 5 things. So the 5 things are, I love you for, I thank you for, I'm sorry for, please forgive me for, and it's okay to go.
I love that.
So let it be a love letter to them. Talk about your favorite memories, the things that you've learned from them, and let that sit for a while. And when you're ready, the second letter is going to be a response letter. It's going to be a letter from your pet to yourself, right? With everything that you know that they would say, with all of the love and forgiveness and encouragement and sometimes sassiness that they would say to you, right? In response, what would they say to you and to support you during this time? And then let that sit a little bit. And then the third letter is going to be a letter from you to you. And this third letter is going to be a letter of self-compassion, of allowing yourself to be human, acknowledging that nobody has a crystal ball, reminding yourself that you did the best that you could, and reminding yourself of the lessons that you're going to take moving forward that your loved one taught you. A letter of forgiveness, oftentimes. So writing those 3 letters can be really helpful in just helping us have a sense of goodbye before we say goodbye, or a sense of closure after we say goodbye.
Right. That's a fantastic idea. I feel like a lot of times people apologize for the grief that they're feeling, right? It's something that I catch a lot of people doing if they're feeling emotional or they feel like they need to kind of suck it up.
So, one of the most common things that happens in our support groups is somebody will be telling their story and they start crying. What's the first thing they do? They apologize.
Right.
They apologize to us for those tears. And that's why I say I have one big rule in my groups, and that is no apologizing for your tears, right? Because your loved one is worth every single tear. But we grow up in a society that, there was a study that was done that showed that by teenage years, kids are sent thousands of messages that tell them that they should experience pain and hurt and negative emotions alone. And we are brought up to think that our negative, or not, I don't want to say negative because emotions aren't positive or negative. They just are. Our harder emotions are a burden on others. And I think that it's important to remember that if you find safe spaces, because not every space, not every person is a safe place to share those feelings with. But, it's important to find those safe spaces and know that you are not a burden. Your grief is not a burden, and it deserves to be validated. It is valid. It hurts, and it's okay that it hurts. You don't have to be okay all the time. I don't think that anybody is okay all the time. right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to be human. It's part of the human experience to have those times in our lives where everything changes and we have to
Yep.
figure out where to go from here. And it's
Yep.
confusing and it's sad and it's hard. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, just feel what you need to feel unapologetically and
Yeah.
unabashedly.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. And that's not always easy to do. But
It's not.
if you can remind yourself to be unapologetic about your feelings, I think
Mm-hmm.
that that will provide you uh, some catharsis
Mm-hmm.
and a sense of empowerment in your grief experience.
Right. And I think part of the key of what you said is having at least one person who can be really that supportive
Right.
presence in your life, or who makes you feel like it's okay to be you and it's okay to have these emotions. And part of that is what you do with your groups. Are these groups like
Hmm.
open? Do you just have to anyone, or are they specific to where you are, or are they on
Yes.
the web? Are they virtual or are they in person?
So all of our groups are virtual.
Oh,
They're all over Zoom, and all of our groups are free. We do have some paid services like the one-on-ones and our workshop that we
uh-huh.
offer, but
Okay.
all of our groups are free. And all you have to do is go on our website, lapoflove.com, go to Pet Loss Support, and register for our group. We offer them most weeks. We offer them every day of the week. Sometimes we're not able to if things come up, but anybody can join. We also have an anticipatory grief group.
Oh, you
So
do.
people who are feeling that anticipatory grief group, I host that group on Thursdays.
Okay.
So we offer that once a week. And we
Okay.
also offer a group for behavioral euthanasia and people who had to make that difficult decision.
Mm.
Um,
Can we
so
talk
yeah,
about
we
what
just,
behavioral
yeah,
euthanasia? Because can we touch on that really briefly? Because that's a
sure.
really tough one. What is
Oh yeah.
behavioral euthanasia for people who may not know what it
So,
is?
behavioral euthanasia is when a family or pet parent has to make the decision to euthanize their pet due to severe behavior issues such
Mm-hmm.
as aggression or severe
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, where
Mm-hmm.
their quality of life is being impacted, and the family's quality of life is being impacted. And oftentimes it can be the kindest decision for the pet, especially if
Sure.
they're unable to be rehomed,
Yeah.
and or if rehoming, they're just going to go from home to home to home. It's going to cause instability and fear in
Mm-hmm.
their life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be the kindest decision because mental illness exists in animals as well. But you want to talk about guilt? That's the granddaddy of guilt right there. People who make that decision do not make it lightly. They don't.
I would assume that some of the emotions around choosing behavioral euthanasia would be um, judgment from others, feeling like you may be somehow you failed in some form or another because you couldn't fix it, or help or feel a bit
Yes.
helpless,
Hmm.
even though people who end up choosing behavioral euthanasia have often tried as many things as they could possibly do to get to that point. They've worked with trainers, they've worked with behavioralists, they've tried rehoming or worked with rescues or all of the things. And it's not something that someone takes lightly, for sure.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
um, guilt, like you said, is a big one, and the feeling
Yeah.
of that they failed their pet is a big one as well, even if they did
Yeah.
absolutely everything that they could to help them get through this. And there's definitely
Mm-hmm.
the risk of judgment from other people who
Yeah.
don't understand your story and who
Right.
have never been in that position before. To be
Yeah.
afraid of your own animal is really scary. To have a pet that has hurt
Yeah.
people that you love and care about, it leaves you with a very difficult decision. And, sometimes some people don't want to wait until something catastrophic happens
Yep.
and then their hand is
Right.
forced to euthanize, right? Because that can happen if something catastrophic does
And then
happen.
there's the
That's
guilt
going to happen either
associated
way.
with something catastrophic
And
happening.
so,
And, maybe you didn't make the decision soon enough. You were on the
exactly.
fence or all the things. It's just all so complicated.
Yeah, there's a lot of really confusing emotions that go on with behavioral euthanasia, and just having a safe place to kind of talk out those words, because sometimes when we say things out loud, we allow those thoughts to kind of click in our own heads, or somebody else does the words that you had been looking for. It can be really helpful as well.
Great that you guys have that. Is there a limit on how many people are in each of your groups, or?
Yeah, so it depends on the group. The anticipatory grief group tends to be a little bit smaller, and so there's a little bit more engagement that we can do, which I like. Usually, I don't think I've ever had more than 10 people.
Okay, that's great.
But yeah, the support groups that we have every day, it ranges from the time of day. The weekend groups tend to be a little bit fuller, but it can be anywhere between 15 to like 25 people. And typically not everybody shares. A lot of people come just to listen.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people come just to listen, and that's okay. Some people never even turn their camera on. That's absolutely okay.
I was also going to ask that. Do you have to turn your camera on?
Nope. Yeah. Whatever feels right to you, right to you. And even if you want to share and keep your camera off, that's okay too. Or if you want to share in the chat, some people share their story in their chat and they're not ready to speak, and there's people who come for 3 months and they're finally ready to share their story. So there's whatever like helps you feel supported and whatever you feel like you're ready to do. I always say, don't let anybody dictate your grief to you. This is your grief journey. Your heart knows what it needs, and it's important that you honor that.
Right. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you coming on here. Even just talking to you has kind of helped me. And I might pop on one of those anticipatory grief, as long as I know that I don't have to turn my camera on. I have to pop on one of those and listen to people sharing their stories. And I think it would be really helpful. So
thank you so much for just having me on to talk about this subject that I'm clearly passionate about. And I'm always here if you ever want to talk again.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Baru Podcast. If you're interested in learning more about the wonderful pet loss support groups that Lap of Love and Christiana offer, you can check out lapoflove.com. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate and follow the Baru Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at Baru Podcast. And if you have a story of canine companionship that you'd like to share with me, or a question or even a comment, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me, Charlotte, at thebaru.com. All right, you guys, let's chat next week.